Welcome to the STEM Pathways podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of science, technology, engineering, and math. I'm your host, Rohan Sharma, a passionate explorer of all things STEM. Each episode, we bring you captivating stories, cutting-edge research, and inspiring interviews with experts and enthusiasts who are pushing the boundaries of innovation. Whether you're a student, a professional, or just curious about how the world works, join us as we unlock the mysteries of the universe and explore the endless possibilities of STEM. Let's get started. Today, I'll be interviewing Jiang, who is currently an undergraduate at Yale. How are you doing today?
Good. Very interesting concept that you have here. So yeah, I'm here to share what I have.
So to get started, I wanted to ask what kind of activities you were doing in high school.
Yeah, so for high school, I attended this high school in my local area. Not exactly like a magnet nor like a charter. It's kind of like a public institution, but in the middle of all of that. It's called the Gwinnett School of Mathematics, Science, and Technology. And obviously, from the name, it has a big STEM focus. So a lot of what I did in high school was related to studying science, studying engineering, and participating in a lot of academic activities. In terms of strictly like extracurricular activities, my biggest ones were Science Bowl and Quiz Bowl. So a lot of just hard-hitting academic tournaments and competitions. That was what I would say where I was mostly involved with in terms of relating to school but extracurricular.
Yeah. Can you talk about some classes you were taking?
Yeah, sure. I think my favorite classes in high school were AP Bio and AP Chem. Those are the ones that offered me the most challenge, the ones that were most interesting, and introduced me to the most variety of topics that I thought were relevant to my career developments and what I wanted to study in the future. Outside of that, I did take like sort of like the whole breadth of like what my school had to offer in terms of whether it's like engineering. So my school had like an engineering pathway where starting in ninth grade, you're required to take physics and engineering combined into this one block type of class, and that continued into sophomore year with a focus on that engineering. So I did that, enjoyed my time there. And then when I had like more liberties to pick my own electives, most of my classes were sort of AP sciences. So I picked chem, I picked the difference AP physics, electricity and magnetism, and mechanics being the big ones. And then, unfortunately, like I feel like much of my school experience was cut off due to COVID because that started my junior year and extended to my senior year. But I also had the chance to participate in the dual enrollments program with Georgia Tech. And so I took a relatively high level of math, starting in like BC Calc, and then moving towards dual enrollment with linear algebra and multivariable calc, and then finishing up with differential equations. So
Yeah.
all college level stuff, but very interesting, of course.
Mhm. Do you recommend people try out those dual enrollment classes if they do have the chance?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest thing that's dual enrollment classes in general, whether it's with like a very prestigious program or I guess a lesser, smaller community-based college, I think no matter what, you're getting exposed to what college life is actually like. So a lot of that means independence. High school, teachers are really holding your hand through the entire process. With colleges, they're they're giving you the content and then they're letting you do whatever you want, which can be hard for a lot of people because that's a very different form of learning. So I think that exposure, having that exposure in high school is really important. And I think something that everyone should really try out. Beyond that, um, reaching for harder challenges and contents, that's something that's you probably will not get in most of your high school classes, even with AP classes that are supposed to be designed to be, similar or straight up adaptations of entry level college classes. For the most part, you're getting a full year to tackle what most classes cover in a single semester. So just the rate at which you learn in dual enrollments type classes is a lot faster. The only thing I would say about dual enrollment is that the academic rigor of colleges around the states and around the world in general is highly variable. So I think that I work with a program called Matriculate, which advises like high school kids in their application to college. And what I've noticed is that some students who are super advanced and have taken a lot of dual enrollment, but have ironically not taken as much AP classes, I feel like when you're in the college admissions process, colleges are actually looking, admissions officers are looking to see APs to see like a level of standard, you know. You can take a class at some college that might not be reputable and they don't know what sort of challenges you're experiencing with that class. So having the AP scores and sort of track record to back up your level of academic challenge, I think is important. So balancing between APs and dual enrollments. And of course, you know, dual enrollment is challenging. So I wouldn't recommend, you know, like overloading into that and getting really burnt out in your high school.
Yeah. So when you're doing dual enrollment as a high schooler, um, were you still graded on like a curve with the other college students, or how did that work?
Um, Not at all. At least in the program that I was in, with GT's distance math program, um, that was not at all. I was basically just considered part of the class, so I did my own thing. Now, your own high school and how they choose to handle your dual enrollment process, whether it's, you know, like more hands on or like they're just like, you know, leaving you do whatever. I think that could depend. So for my own high school, they decided to offer like a generous curve. So whatever letter grade you got that bumped up a letter. So say that you got a B, right? You would get bumped that up to an A. And if you were an A, you get bumped up to like, you know, like the surplus, like above like 100, right? So that's like something nice that my school and my county system was. Obviously, you know, like be ready to be challenged, be ready to have a grade that is not the most optimal, and your school or county or whatever system that you're working outside of the college not giving you a generous, you know, curve. I think that the colleges themselves are probably not going to give you any sort of like grading curves. It's up to your high school or whatever other affiliation you have with your own education system that is going to dictate that.
Yeah. So what made you choose your major for college?
um I mentioned a bit about my background in AP biology and AP chemistry. Those are the courses that I really enjoyed. I guess I've known for quite a while that I wanted to do something in the life sciences, especially with either developing research or developing medications, right? And so that pretty naturally led into what I wanted to study in college, which as of right now is a double major in chemistry and molecular biology. Outside of what I wanted to study, I guess I had a lot of floating around interests, which I studied a lot of, and at some point were my majors, but I actually didn't end up. So I guess the broader lesson here is that what you're studying as a major can change very quickly and very, you know, like drastically. At some point, I started. I guess I should walk a little through the backstory. So I started in molecular biology, but in specifically in biochemistry and biophysics. At Yale, that's called molecular biochemistry and biophysics, so MBMB. Um, and then I started to develop more of an interest in chemistry. And I also took a bunch of econ classes for funsies and realized I really got into it. So then I changed to become a double major in chemistry and economics. And then at some points, you know, I got more back into the biology of things and realized, you know, like I wanted to split my chem and bio interests. So biochemistry is fundamentally a very different idea from chemistry, which is a very fundamentally different idea from biology. And so I ended up splitting my interest in biochem into chemistry as its own thing, so mainly in organic synthesis, and then molecular biology, which is its own separate thing, mainly concerned with genetics. So then those became now my current majors. So my econ ended up being more of like a side interest. At Yale, unfortunately, there are no minors, so that would have been my minor or one of my minors, but you know that didn't end up working out. So now I'm just a double major in chemistry and molecular biology. And then as far as, you know, how I determined that, I walked you a little through that process. Initially, I was interested in biochemistry, and then I strayed more towards the chemistry side, especially as I started doing research within chemistry. And then I hit that econ like phase and was like really interested, and still really am interested. And then ultimately, I tried to re-explore my bio interests, but in a separate capacity compared to typical biochemistry, which is very pathway heavy, very I guess very mechanisms in the cell heavy, a lot of signaling, um, a lot of downstream effects, right? And then I guess I focus that specifically into a bit of molecular and genetic biology, which is what I'm majoring in now. So yeah, a bit of a brief walkthrough into how my majors came to be. But you know, it's a constantly developing process, especially at a lot of prestigious institutions such as Yale, where it's more liberal arts focused, your major is not certainly a summary of what you studied. It's probably the start of the story only, and not really at all a description. At some, I guess, more engineering focused schools, you might have a different experience where your major is something that you pick and stick with for like pretty much your entire time, and it's pretty difficult to change your major. And all the courses that you take are probably pertaining to that major. But for a more liberal arts leaning institution like Yale, that's pretty fluid, and it can change like with a click of a button, which is exactly what I did to change my majors.
Yeah. So outside of classes, what activities are you involved in at Yale?
The biggest one that I've been involved with is called Splash at Yale. I've given this spiel like a billion times, so like people who might be familiar with me, they'll see this and laugh. But Splash at Yale is basically a program. It's a nonprofit advocacy, education advocacy program that brings New Haven kids, greater Connecticut area kids, not just New Haven, I guess, but most of our kids are typically recruited from the New Haven area. We'll bring middle and high school children into Yale, and we have Yale undergraduate and graduate students teach them classes on literally anything. The sort of motto of our program is, teach anything, learn anything. And that's the point. We're splashing into new interests. And it's really like it's similar to what you're doing right now, I imagine, where you're getting exposure for kids at a young age into some things that they will never get to study until much later on in life, whether it's college or beyond. And it's a good chance for us older students to show off our interests, to talk a little about some of the things that have inspired us throughout our time, throughout our childhoods and our careers and our time studying, and share that. So I'll give some examples of classes. For example, this past semester last spring, I taught an introduction to the pharmaceutical industry, which is what I'm involved with. So I talked a little about starting with like, I guess, small molecules and how that entire development process expanded into a whole industry, and then how the newest, I guess, development in the industry is a focus on biologics, developing proteins and other large molecules to tackle issues in the biological space and create new medicines. So that was one of the classes I taught. The more interactive and I guess greater exposure one is chemistry of food. So showcasing using food and the culinary arts as a familiar something that everyone is able to understand and access and explore with freely, and explaining some of the chemistry that goes into that. So whether like you're cooking on the stove top or you're boiling something, what sort of interactions go into that, and how the chemistry plays out from an analytical level, a college level analytical level. So those are just some ideas of what I was interested in. I always share as example, one of my best friends taught a class on Disney architecture. So 100% does not have to be academic. It could be something that's super out of the way, super out there, super interesting for the kids to learn about, and tie it back to real world applications in terms of both what you might study and what you might do for your career. So that's one of the big ones I'm involved with. It's a big process. We bring in, at this point, it's like 500 kids every semester. Huge, like hurdle of manipulating human resource and like moving around like volunteers and admins, organizing the operations. That is a huge process. I'm not the president anymore. I recently have retired and joined the board, so it's up to my kiddos now that I've trained. That's one of the big ones. And then the other one, which I alluded to earlier, is Matriculates. And that one I'm coaching. It's a pretty famous organization if you are a first generation low income kid like me. They basically recruit high schoolers. So I've had many friends who were once involved in this process. Unfortunately, I was not involved back in high school. But basically, they recruit the high schoolers who they believe are low income, high achieving, and help them through the college application process. So I'm currently a mentor on the college side. They recruit campus college kids, usually ones who are also of similar background. That way they can relate to the experience and share their own learnings throughout their time applying. But yeah, the whole point is, how do you apply to college, especially for kids who have not had resources in their parents when they're first generation. They don't know anything about college, like how do you apply? What are the steps? What are things that you should write about? What are things that you should avoid? What does the financial aid process look like? How do you pay for college for many of these kids, including me a long time ago? a long time ago, I say 4 years ago. Um, what does a process look like? Because I didn't expect that I would be able to afford college, especially at a prestigious institution like Yale University. So big part of that is just overcoming these misconceptions that many first generation low income kids have. So yeah, super rewarding process. I'm currently mentoring 4 kiddos. It's been fun because right now it's like we're hitting the stride of the application season. So yeah, it's a lot of work, of course, but very rewarding. Those are the big ones, community involvement stuff.
Yeah.
I got
So if
myself
you
involved.
had to give someone one piece of advice who's still in high school and wanting to follow a similar career path as you, what would you say?
Um, it depends on your personality. I think the biggest part is to be self-aware. I know I'll give like the cliche one and I'll give what I think is a one that you probably haven't heard elsewhere. The cliche one I'll start with. It's be proactive. Like reach out. So like what you're doing right now, I think is really cool. Reach out to people who you think could be resources, look for mentors, um, be really engaged with people who are experienced in the industry. I myself am far from an expert. I am also trying to get in the process. So also take everything I say with a grain of salt because I'm literally just a college student and figuring out my own path in this whole journey. But yeah, look for resources, look for people who have tenured careers in industry, and whether it's academia or industry, whatever you're trying to get into, um, and hear what they have to say. I think the biggest part specifically about my backgrounds in pharmaceuticals and with chemistry and biology, right, is that it's an esoteric topic. It's not as easily accessible to a lot of people. It's not something that people actually have ideas of how to make a career out of. Like it's I guess for me growing up, like a common misconception that people had was that what are you going to do with a life science career? This may be different from your background and upbringing. Like I guess like the typical upbringing of us Asian kiddos is that you become a doctor, right? But that's one route, a very competitive one, and one that's not for everyone, right? So you could work as a scientist, but I think that's the perception that I grew up with is that becoming a scientist has low pay, or it's not going to be a monetarily, you can't support yourself with becoming just a scientist. Um, and there are caveats to that, like it's a lot more than just that. But I think there's just a lot of misconceptions with our industry, and so getting an insider's perspective on what those actually mean, I think that's important to have. So be proactive, reach out, and also at the end of the day, you're putting your own name out there, and people will recognize that. Reputation will carry pretty far in every industry, but especially in science. With every industry, though, truly it carries far. So make a good name for yourself. Hold yourself, like imagine like how you're presenting yourself, and would it be something that's it reflects well when you're trying to get a job or build your career. So that's the cliche advice: is be proactive, build your personal brands. The one that you're probably not going to hear about is wait, I'm like actually like forgetting. Like I literally like had it a second ago. Let's come back to that. So I literally like have like mental loss.
Yeah. So, what are your current future plans?
My future plans. So I mentioned a bit about that background and economics. So I think I'm going to take that into a greater direction. I'm exploring a lot of roles in between pharmaceuticals and biology and chemistry and business. So building those two, trying to develop a business background for my future, starting off with a lot of rotational analyst programs, typically within biotech or pharma, just getting in as wide of an experience as possible, whether that's within research, how different emerging medications are going along in their processes, and then potentially which ones to acquire or license for a bigger company. That could be one area I'm interested in. And then as well as how do you market and sell and effectively get these drugs to the right patients and the right demographics. That's another part. Previously, this past summer, I worked a sales internship. And so that's another area that I'm trying to focus on is how do we maximize the commercial outputs of the medications. And the reality of the pharmaceutical industry is that because it's so strictly regulated, there is a lot of issues with there are a lot of issues with access and getting your drug out there. Suppose that you've created a miracle drug. It's if you don't market it and sell it and promote it effectively, it will not get used, despite the fact that it could have perfect efficacy. So that's why talking and promoting your medication is a big part of the industry. And that's honestly just the role of big pharma, is to promote the medications that have already made it. Because once you make it through FDA approval, your drug is pretty efficacious and competitive on the market. So that's another area that I would explore. And then the last sort of area is the analytical operations perspective, looking at the whole development process, looking at the manufacturing process, and seeing how we can optimize that for the maximum efficiency. So those are some of the areas I'm looking into, just getting a whole array of experiences, getting myself out there and learning more. So never stop learning.
All right then. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Yes, it was good talking to you. Do you have any questions about your own, I guess, career and how you want to develop?